If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. In this episode today, as part of the Preparing for Labour series on the podcast, I'm chatting with Jo Terry, who is founder and managing director of Melbourne Midwife. She's also a midwife, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth information sharer. So Jo offers group birthing classes, private education packages, and home visits for lactation support. And in this episode today, we are discussing optimal baby positioning. So it's a great episode and one which I took away some great information, and I'm going to do a little bit of reading from a physio point of view. She offered some really great insights from a seasoned midwife in terms of how to prepare your body for birth. So we discussed, why is baby positioning so important? Is there anything mum can do to help with baby positioning? And she also talks about things that the birth partner can do. And she discusses at what stage to start optimal baby positioning strategies. So if this is something you've been keen to learn more about, this episode is for you. Before we do dive into this episode, I just would like to invite you to join our Preparing for Labour workshop. So in this pregnancy workshop, you learn to help prepare your body and pelvic floor for birth and beyond. So you'd learn about pelvic floor preparation. You'll learn how to do or what perineal massage is and how it may help to reduce your risk of perineal tears and episiotomy. You'll learn some different strategies for birth, including active birth techniques, positions for labour. We discuss the use of TENS machine, and you will learn some after birth recovery essentials to help boost that all-important after birth recovery period. So as a women's health physio, everything that I share in this free pregnancy workshop are things that I believe every woman deserves to know when pregnant to really help with a childbirth and after birth experience. To register for this workshop, just head to fitnessmama.com/pregnancy workshop, and the link is also in the show notes. All right, ladies, let's dive into this episode all about optimal baby positioning with Jo. Jo, thank you so much for joining me today on the Fitness Mama podcast. We're discussing all things optimal baby positioning, childbirth preparation, and it's super exciting to have you on board. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. So it's an honour. Thank you.
Oh, it's exciting. And we were just talking off air. I'm going to say it. This is your first podcast. I'm really excited. I'll try not to scare you off too much.
Yeah, okay. I've listened to lots but never been in one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So could you just give the listeners a little quick rundown of who you are? And I'd love to know what made you get into this area that you're in today?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jo Terry and I'm the founder of Melbourne Midwife. So I'm a midwife and a childbirth educator and a lactation consultant. And at the start of the COVID pandemic, I was working at a major hospital in Melbourne in their childbirth education department. And because of, the way things kind of panned out the department pretty much closed its services. People couldn't, do the group classes and things like that. So I started a business, and the business is just all about, educating women and their partners and their support people into sort of having the birth and baby experience that they'd really love to have. And so I'm all about, what is it you want, what's happening in your body, what's happening with your baby, and how do you actually navigate the system that you're most probably birthing in. So that's kind of what I'm all about.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know we could probably talk all day about everything, but we're going to try to refine
it down.
Yeah. So we're going to try to refine it down to just more the optimal baby positioning, because I know it's talked about a lot lately, especially on social media. So let's start off with, is optimal baby positioning important and why?
Yeah, so I actually think it's equally as important as the mum dilating. So there's two major things happening in birth. The mum is dilating and the baby is navigating the pelvis. And I think in our culture and certainly in my training and in modern medicine, the focus is often on mum dilating and this sort of sense of this symmetrical dilation that's not even kind of necessarily true. And what I found as a midwife and certainly a lactation consultant where I see women post-birth is that, a lot of intervention happens because babies actually have trouble navigating the pelvis. So mum might be dilating beautifully, or the dilation may be actually affected by the navigation of the baby. And so just having this understanding that there's these two really incredibly beautiful things going on together, and they really go hand in hand. And they're just a really important part of perhaps what we, a normal sort of vaginal birth for a woman. Yeah.
Okay, so can the baby positioning, do they influence each other? For example, if the baby isn't positioned optimally, can that affect the dilation?
Absolutely. So a baby who's really well positioned in the pelvis on sort of that, we call it left anterior. So baby's back is sort of at the front of the mum, a little bit off to the left-hand side of the mum's body. And if your baby doesn't have its head nice and well flexed in the pelvis, perhaps baby's back is facing mum's back in a posterior position, or baby's more off to the right, that beautiful little head isn't actually pushing well on top of the cervix. So a really well flexed head has this beautiful shape that actually fits right into the cervix, and every time there's a contraction, it's actually the baby that's helping to open the cervix as well as that sort of muscle contraction. So what we find is there's been, I think over the last 20 years, like a 60% increase of posterior presentations because of our lifestyle and the way we sit all day and our beautiful couches that have us reclining at the end of the day when we're pregnant. And it can mean for very long, inefficient labour, because even though there's contractions, they're not really doing much. So a woman might be in labour for quite a long time, and we might offer a cervical assessment and she's 2 centimetres or something and she's been at it for a while, but you can get that baby to rotate and then it fits together like a beautiful puzzle.
So is there a way of predicting? So you suggesting that if we can find out if a woman's getting close to birth, if we can determine the position of her baby, is that almost a predictive factor in terms of how labour is going to eventuate, or can things change really quickly?
Things can change depending on the mobility and the uprightness of your labour. Gravity is a really important factor in that. But ideally, you do go into labour left lateral, so the baby's on the left-hand side, sort of facing backwards. And we know that they're sort of the more efficient labours. So, yeah, you can, like if you're going to your appointments from sort of 36 weeks onward and the baby's posterior, I'd be doing lots of things to try and rotate that baby in the actual pregnancy. And the other sort of predictive factor, I would say, would be some pain in your pregnancy in the pelvis. So I love the analogy of have you heard the sort of hot air balloon analogy?
No.
Have you heard that? Oh, it's a fantastic analogy for labour. So if you imagine a hot air balloon is the uterus and the basket that the people are in are the cervix. And then how the balloon and the basket are connected by ropes?
Yeah.
Well, I sort of see them as being all the soft tissue and the ligaments that are connecting the uterus with the cervix.
Yeah.
And pain in pregnancy, in my understanding, perhaps means that, on one side of that balloon, some of the ropes are shortened. And so like tight ligaments on one side, which could be, from a previous injury, or perhaps you favour one side, or it's just the way that you're standing, the way that you're sitting. So sometimes if someone says to me they've got that sort of pain, I'm like, go and get some body work, physio or osteo, in order to balance out those ligaments.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. Are you suggesting that pelvic girdle pain, so pain within the glutes, that sacroiliac joint, pubic symphysis, that has a potential predictive in terms of birth outcomes and how the ease of birth?
That's my understanding of it, yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
you're going to have to shoot me that research, because that's amazing. I'd love to read up more on that. Obviously, dealing with a lot of women with pelvic girdle pain.
Because when you think about it, the way a baby rotates in the pelvis, if one particular part of the pelvis is tighter, then that baby is potentially going to get stuck in certain spots.
I think that's if the pelvic girdle pain's originating from tightness, whereas there are lots of potential causes for pelvic girdle pain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, absolutely. And my understanding of it is very rudimentary compared to perhaps your understanding of, the mechanisms of that. But, for example, say a baby's not progressing into the pelvis and things seem to be stuck. Part of something you can do is perhaps like an inversion, where you actually put your bottom up in the air, have your elbows and head down, and 6 or 7 contractions. And what happens is the baby kind of comes back up out of the pelvis. You do a little bit of movement and the baby can like re-navigate.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, love it. That's great. Okay, well, let's dive into that a little bit more. So you're suggesting maybe at 36 weeks is the time to start including some of these nice positions and postures to help the baby navigate its way. You've mentioned inversions, and I love, especially at this stage of pregnancy, inside Fitness Mama, we've got so many of these beautiful exercises that we do in these positions. So it's like you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We might be working the triceps in this sort of gently inverted position. So, I love hearing about this. What are a few different postures and positions that you really like for women to adopt during this period?
Yeah, so I really love teaching rebozo. Do you know about rebozo?
Can you explain it to everyone?
Yeah. So rebozo is sort of a traditional Mexican technique. It's often used to actually turn a baby from posterior to anterior. But what I like to do in my classes is I actually teach partners or support people how to use rebozo. So it's basically a woman is sort of on her hands and knees, and you get a large scarf and you make like a hammock around the baby. And the person behind her would actually sort of actually take the weight of the baby using the scarf, and then you just sort of do like this gentle sifting. And what it does is it actually relieves a lot of that pressure for women, because all of a sudden, they've been carrying this baby around and your pelvis is doing a hell of a lot of work. And then, all of a sudden they get this feeling of, oh, I'm not actually holding the baby. So that would be one of them that I would teach. Another one I really love, I mean, apart from sort of general ball work on a fit ball and, lots of circles and figure eights and stretches, would be the sort of side lying. So in spinning babies, it's called shaking the apples, where a woman sort of lays on her side with the top leg. It's hard to describe it. The top leg is sort of a little bit higher than the bottom leg. And you're really just doing this gentle, light shaking of the sort of buttocks area and around the sort of lower back. And that can just help soften. I think sometimes by the time we actually get to labour, that pelvis is kind of a bit tight and a bit overworked. Yeah. Even something as simple as from 36 weeks laying on your side on the couch with your fit ball next to the couch and that top right leg right over on the fit ball, so that you've got that really lovely rotation, which is going to encourage that baby to go into that left lateral position.
Yeah. So pretty much trying to avoid or limit how much sustained sitting you're doing during the day.
Yes, and even if you're doing the sitting, I think it's my understanding of it is from at least 36 weeks, preferably earlier, that your hips are always higher than your knees. Because when you recline, our knees come up and the heaviest part of our baby wants to rotate into the back of the pelvis.
Yeah.
And so, if you have to be at work or at a desk, sit on a fit ball because you can't slouch on a fit ball. When you come home from work, that's sort of not reclining back. I know that's a super comfy position when you're pregnant, but actually even laying on your side or even, a couple of cushions on the lounge room floor and leaning over your coffee table, sitting backwards on a chair, those sort of things where hips higher than knees, I think is probably the simplest way to remember it.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned about lying down because that's great for pelvic floor to rest as well. Like 36 weeks, everything, with all the weight of your whole pelvis and the baby and the fluids sitting on top of your pelvic floor gets very fatigued by the end of pregnancy.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that I try and encourage partners with this work is, particularly for labour, that sort of idea that in between contractions is kind of actually when we do our opening. And that's based on how relaxed you are. So in the mouth and the jaw is kind of, loose lips, loose hips, we say. But the mouth is sort of representative of the cervix. And so trying to get the partners to do little simple movements that sort of get the woman to sigh, basically. You're wanting to really release all that tension in between contractions. So this stuff works very much in labour. And so part of what I do is support people to do it throughout the pregnancy. So by the time they get to labour, they're really well versed at this idea of getting the body to relax. Yeah. And so, and even if, your midwife doesn't, is busy or, there's lots going on, there's someone there who after every contraction knows what to do with you and your pelvis and your body to help that opening.
I love that. And this really rings true because if you've listened to my podcast for a while, you know how I talk so much about your pelvic floor relaxation during labour is super important. It's not a time we want to be zipping up and lifting up and closing off that birth canal, which is almost our natural reaction if we're in any discomfort.
Exactly.
So having these strategies that you're talking about, loose lips, relaxing, deep breaths, it does help with your whole nervous system, but also pelvic floor too. So that's a bonus.
And I had a beautiful moment the other day. I make up like it's called Rose Otto, and it's like a labour spritz, and it's a rose, And I was reading that spray actually does loosen the pelvic ligaments, and I was thinking, I was really relating it to when someone buys you roses. It's quite a romantic flower, and you sigh, and you maybe want to make a baby with that person who's bought you roses. Because, I really love that idea too, that, babies want to be born in the environment in which they're made.
Yeah.
Oxytocin and darkness and movement is often how, babies are conceived all sorts of different ways. But I really love that connection. And I think, even your mouth, that kissing in early labour can sometimes be really beautiful for your pelvic floor because it opens it and releases it.
Oh, beautiful. How do you sell that rose?
I do sell it. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
we'll get the
yeah.
details at the end.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Sometimes I give it to some lovely clients that do a little bit of a package with me. It's a little gift I give sometimes. Yeah,
Beautiful.
it is available. Yeah.
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 Okay,
yeah.
so we've talked about why optimal baby positioning is so great. We've talked about how to do it. I'd love to know when might it not be helpful for a woman to be, or is it ever not helpful for a woman to be doing optimal baby positioning exercises?
Look, I think if you have any sort of high risk, like perhaps I know with rebozo you have to be, you don't do it if you have a breech baby or if you have a low-lying placenta. So there's certainly things like that you need to be careful about. Everything that I teach is extremely gentle, and it's probably not that much different from a woman just walking.
Yeah.
It's a really good question, and I'm trying to think of. Yeah.
I guess even because do we know how likely this is going, the likelihood that this will help? Do we know any stats around this?
I mean, a lot of it is sort of spinning babies type concept, and there's a lot of I don't know the actual evidence, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence around, things like the Gaskin maneuver, which is when a woman is in labour and she has shoulder dystocia. There's a particular maneuver that you can do where you actually, if the woman happens to be on her back, you turn her onto her hands and knees, and it releases the baby. And it just changes that pelvic outlet enough. As midwives, you see it all the time, like someone's in a particular position and the baby's just not moving. And then, sometimes even the action of perhaps getting out of the bath, that lunge, getting out of the bath can be enough to change the pelvic outlet. So, look, I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
And I know as a midwife, I've done it countless times where, you can see that baby just needs to rotate.
Yeah, lovely. And I guess even if it's not effective, it's no harm, is it? So it's so gentle, as you said. If you're doing it 36 weeks, it can just be a really nice, relaxing position. Like even if it's not going to be effective, it's still got a lot of other beneficial outcomes, I'm sure.
I mean, even just to feel a bit more comfortable in that later stage of pregnancy, perhaps you're less likely to get an induction because you're actually feeling a bit more comfortable and,
Sleep better.
You sleep better, yeah. Yeah, no harm, of course, yeah.
Yeah, interesting, love it. Okay, so I know we could keep on chatting all about childbirth, but is there anything more you wanted to talk about in terms of optimal baby positioning before we wrapped up?
Look, I just think just becoming aware of your pelvis during your pregnancy and really connecting in with it. And I think I often watch women do that really well by spending lots of time on a fit ball. I think it's just that, some women just seem to have an incredible connection with where the baby is and what's happening. And I just think any work you do in that connection can really help bring about a better chance of the kind of birth that you might want to be having.
Oh, Jo, you're speaking my heart. Like I think fitball exercises, fitball exercises, but not even exercises, fitball movements, I should call it, is just beautiful during this stage. Beautiful for relaxation, but also for your muscles, for your pelvis, for your baby. It's just
exactly. And I think it's a really big ask if a woman's never sat on a fitball to then expect she's going to do a 20-hour labour on a fitball. It's a lot. So,
And also knowing, like I teach so many different movements and positions, as I'm sure you do, but doing that for the first time ever in the labour suite with a ball, as you said, it's not just about sitting on the ball. Like there's just so many different positions and postures you can get into with the ball. So knowing that flexibility or variability beforehand is probably key too.
Exactly. And I think particularly for people who are perhaps having a VBAC where, vaginal birth after caesarean, where, perhaps they had the initial caesarean because of, the baby didn't navigate due to positioning, just having those tools under your belt next time can be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And if you've got the tools in your toolkit, then you can pull them out if you need. You might not need them, but at least they're there available. So
exactly.
I wish I'd had all these tools when I was pregnant with my first 10 years ago. No podcasts back then, no Instagram.
Right. I know. Yeah, I've got 18 and 15-year-old and I had those, 3-day posterior labours, and I think now if only I had have known about Rebozo or any of that stuff.
Oh, that's why I'm so grateful to be able to chat with you today. To finish up with, any final words of wisdom for pregnant women who might be listening today and about to embark on this journey?
Yeah, I think really feel into what you want and how you want this to all pan out, and then do some research and seek some guidance about finding your own way through this and what choices can you make that are actually going to support what you want. Get really clear about what it is you want and how you're going to get there.
Love it. Well, on that note, if you're based in Melbourne, if the listeners are based in Melbourne, how do they contact you?
Yeah, so I'm at melbournemidwife.com.au and I run group classes in Coburg, and I do actually live stream my classes as well. So depending on where you're listening from, I've got the facilities to do that. I've had to learn a lot about technology running a business.
Absolutely.
And I also do home visits for lactation. After your baby's born, I come to your home and help sort out any problems. But, you can book online. I'm also on Instagram, Melbourne Midwife. Yeah.
Perfect. And I'll put all those links in the show notes too.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today and chatting to us all about optimal baby positioning. It's been great to talk, and I've learned a couple of things along the way too. So love it.
Beautiful, and lovely to speak with you.
Okay, we'll catch you soon.
You're doing great work.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jo. You too.
Bye. Bye.
That's it, ladies. Before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Jo and how to get hold of or get access to the Preparing for Labour workshop at fitnessmama.com/podcast. So that's it, ladies. Thank you so much for tuning in. I trust you found this episode super valuable. Come and send me an Instagram message, a DM on Instagram at fitnessmama. I would love to connect. Until next week, have a fabulous day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.